I grew up in the middle of farmland in a large 1800s Victorian home. Given its history, there have always been several shacks and barns that once belonged to the builder of this house. There is a highway that sees maybe 3 cars on it during the night, and directly across from said highway, about 200 feet inward of a cornfield, is a shack that I have always found creepy. As kids, myself and friends would dare each other to go inside and look, which always ended up with us going as a team. Nothing scary was ever found, maybe a few broken glasses, metal piles, and miscellaneous items. There was no electricity or any sort of utility that made it homely. Years go by and the existence of the shack becomes a part of my daily life. However, one particular night, as I was watching TV, I noticed a light going off and on outside of my window. After getting startled, I dismissed it as passing cars, simply more frequent than they typically are. An hour passes, it's nearing midnight, and the light stays on. This time, I know for sure it's coming from outside. My family was asleep, but being my 16-year-old self, I needed confirmation. Too bad for me, no one wants to go check it out, so I go alone. I grab my pocket knife and a flashlight, the best I could think of with my shaken thoughts, and take off into the night. As I neared the highway, the light turns off, almost making me choke on air, but I had to figure out what was going on. I make it to the entrance of the shack, which has no door, and slowly begin to enter, my flashlight scanning the room for any sign of life. What happened next, I'll never forget. 5 feet away from me, there's an old tattered recliner, facing away, that my father had tossed in there for future disposal. I shine my light on it because I knew I'd seen it rock ever so slightly. As I did that, a man stands up from the recliner, saying absolutely nothing. All I could tell was that he was middle-aged and wearing a jacket of sorts. Before I could process what was happening, I was already sprinting across the road and praying he wasn't behind me. It felt like years before I could make it to my door, but as I am about to make it into safety, I decide to look back. He was standing in the road completely still, no words whatsoever. It's been 7 years since then. The shack still stands, the recliner remains in place. My dad never believed me. I'd like to begin by describing myself because I believe it's relevant to the story. I'm 25, male and a bit above average height. I have been doing sports 5 to 6 times a week since I've graduated high school: gym, running, CrossFit, squash, swimming, and any team sport my friends decide to play at any given time. My favorite hobbies are mountaineering, hiking, and bouldering. I've just recently purchased a new pair of high-altitude mountaineering boots because it's near the end of the summer season and they were on sale. The plan is to wear them in the Alps next summer on a few ascents. I live in a European capital, one that's surrounded by wonderful nature with many trails and opportunities for hiking. I decided to break in my boots last Saturday. More specifically, because it would have been my granddad's birthday, and he also loved hiking before he died. I selected a nice route that's around 25 kilometers and set off at about 9 in the morning. It rained just the day before, so I expected a fair amount of mud and not so many people as they are easily scared off by the weather. Since the summer was excruciatingly hot, it was a nice change of temperature, especially between trees and such, where it's a few degrees cooler than in the city. In the not-so-distant past, my dog would have definitely joined me on this hike, but she's turning 14 this year, and she doesn't enjoy long-distance walks anymore. The first half of the hike was perfect. The altitude difference along the trail is minimal. I barely broke a sweat, and I misjudged how many people would be out due to the storm the day before. I met at most 6-7 people during the first 2-3 hours, and most of them were cross-country runners. It's worth mentioning that I wasn't walking quickly. I stopped on many occasions to take pictures or study some animals' tracks. There are deer and wild boars in these woods, nothing more menacing. Not animals anyway, but I won't get ahead of myself. Between 12 and 1, the path ran into an actual road, one where cars can go. This road is asphalt, but deep in the forest and can only be used to reach certain landmarks that are also in the forest. My trail required me to take this road for a few hundred meters. As I was walking along the road, I heard a car approach from behind me. It went past me, not too quickly or too slowly. It was an older green SUV with a fresh registration. You can tell by the license plate. Anyway, I thought nothing of it at the time. Then I heard it come back. It drove past me for the second time, now very slowly, and I could clearly see two men sitting in the front seats, wearing baseball caps and sunglasses. I assumed they were gamekeepers, even though those cars have a crest on the hood and on both front doors. As I hike a fair amount, I know these things. I see them around quite a bit. They would also not be driving a car like this. They have Jeeps, which are more suitable for the forest. Then, my trail left the asphalt road and began snaking in the woods again. I walked ahead serenely, gazing at trees and whatnot. I suddenly had the strange sensation that something or someone was behind me. An engine sound was becoming more and more clear as well. At this point, the trail was quite narrow, but if, for whatever reason, you'd want to drive a car on it, you could, just about. When I turned around, the SUV was basically in my face. It was an arm's length away from me, and it stopped just as I had. I looked at the driver, who was staring back, as I can only assume as he was wearing sunglasses. I calmly asked him, "What's wrong? Shall I let you go?" in a polite tone as his window was rolled down. He didn't speak. He slowly started reversing, and he soon disappeared behind a curve. Now I was quite uncomfortable. I also noticed that he was alone in the car, unlike earlier. I listened intently, standing still, since I wasn't sure what was going on. At this point, I was not scared, but there was a faint feeling of unease in the air, and bad thoughts began gathering in the back of my mind. I heard the car, and the engine, stop just behind the curve. I heard a door open and shut, but nothing from that point on. I turned around and began walking towards my destination, at a much faster pace than before. Now I was a bit scared. I didn't understand why he didn't answer, and why he just reversed and left without a word. I wasn't sure what to make of it, and I had no desire to ask him again, or to see him again for that matter. I had just walked enough for these unpleasant thoughts to slowly be erased from my mind. As I had been drinking a lot of water, as I usually do, I decided to find a spot for a brief break. I noticed a perfect spot, a narrow path off my trail leading clearly to a small hunting tower. I walked over to the tower, placed my bag down by the ladder that led up to it, and took a moment. Right before I arrived back to the main trail, I thought to myself how extremely quiet it was. No wind, no noise of any kind, absolutely nothing. This made me realize, just a moment later, how alone I was. Except for the man who was standing maybe 50 meters away from me on the trail, in the direction where I was headed. I only saw this as soon as I stepped back on that trail, since the small one to the tower was well hidden by trees, and you couldn't see the main trail. I looked at him, and I was instantly chilled to the very bone. He was dressed in tactical clothing, with a baseball hat on his head. The only reason he was standing still, I believe, was a moment of surprise that I had appeared from a place where he didn't expect me to appear from. At this point, I was fully and utterly alarmed. He was holding a rifle that had a scope on it. Had this happened without the incident with the SUV, I would have probably walked on along the trail, thinking he's a hunter. However, in light of the strange encounter with the SUV, from which the second man was missing, something in me snapped instantly. In hindsight, it's also illegal to hunt in these woods this time of year. I figured, in the matter of 2 seconds, that I was going to sprint through the woods until exhaustion, towards and past the tower, as it seemed natural to do at the time. If there was no malicious intent on this man's behalf, or the others, he'll just think I'm an idiot and forget about me in 2 minutes. If I'm right, it's the best call I will have ever made. And suddenly, he began running towards me. Adrenaline blossoming within me, I began sprinting away. I sprinted past the tower and deep into the bushes, not sparing my legs as I was wearing shorts and a thermal jumper. I crashed through branches, small trees, and slipped on several occasions. I really did sprint until I was exhausted. I even crossed some smaller trails but didn't even bother to look either way. My pulse was a billion the whole time. I began checking my phone for a signal, but nothing. I was already really angry at myself for not memorizing the license plate. After a while, I began power walking, but still off trail, straight ahead, in a direction that I knew would sooner or later lead me out of the woods. When my phone got a signal, I told the story to several people frantically, but no one took me too seriously. They said I was overreacting and whatnot. You must have misunderstood the situation. Well, I'll let you decide for yourselves if I did or not. Finally, I reached a trail that led directly to a cute little town that borders this rather large forest. It felt like eternity, but I walked the last kilometer to the main square, took off my jumper and put it in my bag. At least I looked a little different from far away. I waited for a bus that took me back to a station near my car, rather anxiously. After the bus ride, during which I studied each car on the road, I walked back to my car, got in, and drove home. My dog welcomed me like I was coming back from a 2-year deployment. Dogs are just amazing. She must have felt that something shook me up. I called the forest's gamekeeper's office. I inquired about whether they have such cars in service as the one I came across. They do not. This happened to me and my mom a few months ago, back in October. It occurred in a very rural part of New Hampshire, like a side road on a side road type of neighborhood. It was pouring out, as it had been raining for pretty much the whole day. My mom had just gotten back from down the street in my sister's car, and I was on the couch in the living room when suddenly I heard the doorbell ring. Our front door has a big glass pane in the front, so we can look out from the inside, and someone can look in from the outside. Through this window pane I saw a man. I didn't get a great look at him, as I didn't have my long-distance glasses on. The man noticed that I had seen him and waved as if trying to be friendly. For the rest of this post, I'll refer to him as Poncho Man. I got up and thought about opening the door for Poncho Man, but relented. As I couldn't properly see who it was, I didn't want to let a stranger into the house. Instead, I went down the hall to my parents' bedroom, where my mom was getting ready for work. She asked what was up, and I explained to her that a man in a poncho was outside our door and wanted to talk to us. She went as white as a ghost. Immediately, she stopped getting ready, closed and locked the bedroom door, and started checking the windows to make sure they were locked. I asked her what was going on. My mom explained that as she was driving home, she had seen Poncho Man. He had been standing, motionless, on the side of the main street. As soon as my mom turned down our road, he started to walk, presumably to follow her. She said the encounter was weird but thought nothing more of it. Why would someone be out in the pouring rain, down a back road in the afternoon? It was like he was waiting for something. I started to panic as well. My mom called my aunt, the two are like best friends, and asked what she should do. My aunt told her to call the police immediately, and so we did. We proceeded to pace around the bedroom, frantically looking out the windows to see if we could see Poncho Man. From where the bedroom was angled, it was impossible to look at the front porch and see if he was still there, but we were desperate for anything. After what felt like hours, we finally saw a police car pull up. We carefully unlocked the door and went down to let the officer in. We explained what we saw, and he agreed to do a scan around the neighborhood. As he left, I noticed there was something on the doorknob. I took it off, and it was a political ad for a candidate who was running for office. It's possible Poncho Man was just campaigning for the candidate, but there are a lot of holes in that story. It was pouring out, so why would you go door to door? And why would you go that route in such a rural neighborhood? The houses are so far apart, you'd barely make a dent on foot. The time doesn't make sense either. Me and my mom were home, but it was about 4 in the afternoon. Most people would still be at work, so you'd probably get no response from knocking anyway. Eventually, the officer returned. He had found the guy down the road and had questioned him. Poncho Man was able to ID himself, and he claimed that he was a political campaigner and was just knocking on doors for that reason. When probed further, conveniently enough, Poncho Man couldn't provide any other door signs, as the one he had left on our house was the last one. That makes the campaign story even more absurd. Our house is in the middle of the street. It's not like we were the last by any means, so why wouldn't you bring enough for the whole street? Even the officer pointed this out to us and said that it was unusual behavior. Although the officer was suspicious of him, there wasn't anything he could do about it, as there was no way to prove intent. He told us to be alert and do not hesitate to call if Poncho Man returns. Fast forward a few weeks, and I start noticing that a police car seems to be permanently stationed down the road from us, about a 3-minute drive. I got curious and asked my mom about it, and she said that there were multiple break-ins into the houses down the road, and the police were doing a sort of sting operation. The Poncho Man encounter and the break-ins may be unrelated, but considering how Poncho Man acted, I have a sinking feeling that they are connected.